The 20th century was no doubt a turning point in the history of design, and while there are many unifying factors in the modernist movement, American design in the 20th century had its own distinct signifiers. While maintaining the Bauhaus ideals of truth in materials and avoiding historicism, American designers were not against ornamentation in order to present things as technologically advanced or futuristic, and this extended to graphic design. Where Scandinavian design between the wars was incredibly minimalistic, sticking to primary colours and 90-degree grids, American designers were not afraid of colour and movement in their designs. After the horror of World War I, the world was looking forward, trying to pivot from the devastation. Paul Rand is perhaps the most famous American graphic designer of the early 20th century, with a career that lasted almost 70 years. Born Peretz Rosenbaum in Brooklyn, New York in 1914, and coming of age between the wars, Rand's youth was a time of great technological advancement and societal change. Persisting post-war anti-Semitism led him to changing his name from Peretz Rosenbaum to Paul Rand to be more palatable to the New York business world, and this is cited as his first creation of a corporate identity. Educated at Parsons School of Design, Rand often said he was self-taught, as the education he received at art school was old-fashioned, rooted in an older, more traditional design methodology. Rand was incredibly productive in his 20s, achieving international recognition for his magazine covers and editorial work, primarily producing covers for Direction magazine. He did this for free in exchange for full artistic freedom, which allowed him to push the boundaries with designs that brought in a new era of American graphic design and advertising. Rand went on to become a prolific brand designer, recognized worldwide for his work with familiar brands like ABC, UPS, Enron, and IBM, including this famous concept with the I, B, and letter M. Rand was not afraid of humour and humanity in his work. Despite protestations from some clients that using humour decreased the value of a brand, he was committed to the idea that humour was essential to effective communication. Rand frequently employed humour in his work, and in his book A Designer's Art, he differentiated between humour and absurdity. He said, "The notion that the humorous approach to visual communication is undignified or belittling is sheer nonsense. Humour is a means of creating confidence, goodwill, and a receptive frame of mind towards an idea or a product." Rand was a pioneering modern designer, but what is modern design? To figure this out, we need to differentiate between modernism, modernity, and modernization. Modernism was a global movement in society and culture that sought a new alignment with the experience and values of modern industrial life. Rand's work followed on from European designers who no longer treated image and copy as separate entities, but as one composition. Rand's work shows clear reference to the modern Dada movement, including discarding the historical and surrealist elements such as distorted bodies and text. Modernity was the name given to all the aspects of a modern life in the 20th century, moving away from that which was antiquated or historical. Modernity was associated with new technology, ways of thinking, urbanization, and new music and art. Modernization is the physical process of moving from the traditional to the modern in any aspect of society. In design, this involved moving away from text and image as separate entities and moving towards the understanding of human-centered design. The design could serve the end user primarily, rather than the business owners and clients commissioning the work. Designers like Rand understood that viewers of his work brought their own intelligence with them, and that not everything had to be explicit as in previous advertising and design work, which primarily showed the name of a company and the product they were selling. In many ways, this was the beginning of the merging of art and design, which had previously been very separate entities. American designers used modern technology to create collage and photo collage, a huge change in comparison to historical work, which was wholly illustrated or engraved. The modern American design system had clear preferences. While American designers were not as adverse to colours as European modernists, there was still a clear dominance of a limited palette and bold colours. Historically, graphic design used photorealistic illustration, and colours were limited by technology rather than choice. 20th century technology meant that the world was a designer's oyster, but minimalistic colour palettes prevailed. The post-war period saw massive leaps in technology, and later into the 20th century, the digitisation of graphic design saw huge changes in the industry and the way Rand worked. Rand was at the helm of the modern attitude of treating design as a trade, exuding expertise and providing companies he worked for with detailed manuals that showed how and why to use the brand the way he had designed it. In this way, Rand was instrumental in the innovation of the modern brand book, which Rand called a graphic standards manual. These books included how and where to use different iterations of a logo, how to implement colour, instructions for physical and digital iterations of branding, and even minutiae about colour variations based on the paper printed upon. Rand's work throughout the mid-20th century shows his modern design principles. 1. Truth in materials. His work was often collage that showed cut edges and obvious paint strokes. He didn't hide his workmanship. 2. A distaste for the historical and/or traditional, either than in contrast to modernity or in parody, and this aligns with Rand's commitment to humour in his work. 3. Limited colour palettes and abstraction. And 4. Form following function. Rand was solid in his belief that the efficacy of communication in a design was key to it. Without clear communication, your design has failed. Paul Rand's influence runs well into the current day. One contemporary designer who can be seen as influenced by Rand is Paula Scher. Born in 1948 in Washington, D.C., Scher was educated at Tyler School of Art before starting her design career in New York. Scher is best known for her typographic work and brand identity design. She started at Columbia Records straight out of university, making album art and posters for the label's artists. This is where she discovered the power of good typography. Scher is a founding member of the design cooperative Pentagram in New York. Her work employs modernist techniques of form following function, with communication being key. She uses limited materials, tending to rely heavily on typography rather than imagery, and avoiding references to history. This is particularly obvious in her Shakespeare in the Park posters that do not in any way reference ruffles or men in tights. There's a clear link between Rand and Scher's desire to make work as simple as possible without losing meaning. Both employ shape and line to direct the eye through their work, and both use colour minimally and meaningfully. Both Rand and Scher are on record stating their indifference to industry standards and trends, and that good design is good design. This confidence and their obvious skill mean that each is internationally recognised as a game changer in graphic design, and both Scher and Rand have been the subject of exhibitions of their work in modern art galleries around the world. The key takeaway from Paul Rand and Paula Scher's bodies of work, stretching more than a century combined, is that communication has to be the end goal of any graphic design. I'd like to finish by reading a poem that appeared in Rand's 1985 book, A Designer's Art. Graphic design, which fulfills aesthetic needs, complies with the laws of form and the exigencies of two-dimensional space, which speaks in semiotics, sans serifs, and geometrics, which abstracts, transforms, translates, rotates, dilates, repeats, mirrors, groups, and regroups, is not good design if it is irrelevant. Graphic design, which evokes the symmetry of Vitruvius, the dynamic symmetry of Hambidge, the asymmetry of Mondrian, which is a good gestalt generated by intuition or by computer, by invention or by a system of coordinates, is not good design if it does not communicate.